All right. So we were saying that imperialism has several consequences. And one of the most important consequences is that some states are more powerful or wealthier. They're more dominant in the international system than others. And some countries are living in poverty. Democracy is still a far ideal in those countries. And there are also civil wars in some countries, in several problems, right, that we have all mentioned so far in this class. Now, this is the last week of classes, so I want to wrap this thing up, and that's why I'm going to start talking about, okay, you know, all of these things that we talked about, which contributed to the evolution of the international system, has led to a certain international regime in the world, okay, that we're living under today, after the Second World War. And we've said a lot about, is this regime, is the hegemony of the United States decreasing? Is there going to be a multipolarity again in the world? Or is China in the rise? So we've talked about several different scenarios for the future. Okay? Before actually speculating more about the future, we need to talk about, okay, this is where we are now. And in where we are, it's really difficult to cooperate for states. As a result of imperialism, as a result of wars, as a result of industrialization, early, late, states are at different stages of their economic and political development. Now, although they're very different from one another, we still want some cooperation between states. I don't think that any state wants war. I don't think that any normal human being would enjoy war between states or within states, okay? So the question to ask then, by the end of the semester is, okay, this is how we evolved in the system as states and as societies and as individuals, in where we stand, how do we actually cooperate? How do states cooperate? And the answer to that will come from, how do people cooperate? Can we actually understand how states cooperate by looking at how people cooperate with one another? Okay? So the last thing that I'm going to talk about is how can we actually increase cooperation in the international system? Because where we stand, we are actually what we have experienced in the past until today, and in the future, can we actually cooperate more? Is it possible to cooperate? Okay, that's our last question to ask. And the answer to that by neoliberal institutionalist scholars, which we didn't cover yet. Remember, in the beginning of the semester, we didn't cover it, and some of you asked me, when are we going to look at neoliberal institutionalism? This is when, okay? Now, we're actually looking at what these guys say about cooperation. And when I say these guys, people like Robert Axelrod, and you have in your reader 2 chapters from a book of his. I'm actually going to ask you to read the first chapter, okay? The second one, you're not responsible in the exam. The first one is the more simple one compared to the other one. But the second chapter is really fun. It's more complicated, but it's really fun, okay? So in the first chapter, Axelrod talks about cooperation and why cooperation is so difficult. Okay, and he talks about how cooperation can actually be achieved. So the neoliberal institutionalists argue that international regimes are the answer to the question, how do we cooperate? We cooperate through international regimes. Well, the question at this point you may ask is, international regimes are indeed a consequence of imperialism and all the things that we have talked about so far in this class. Why? Because the international regimes are established by those who are the winners of the evolution of the international system. The winners of wars, right? Or the superpowers will usually establish international regimes. So as a result, I would say we're going to look at, we looked at how we came to this point, and now at this point we're standing, we are actually functioning in a certain international regime. And how is cooperation achieved through international regimes? That's what we're doing, okay? That's what we are looking at finally in this course. Now, the first thing is, okay, this game that is used to explain why international cooperation is so difficult. And the example is very familiar to those who watch Law and Order. Anyone who watches Law and Order? I actually like watching Special Victims Unit. Okay, I actually like most of its episodes, and they use the prisoner's dilemma quite a lot. Let's just say the game is very simple. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the game is between two prisoners, two people who committed a crime together. And there is an investigator, you know, the detective, and the detective actually wants to get a confession because the confession will provide a good sentence for at least one of the two prisoners, okay? What you want is to put in the prison the guy that really is the criminal there, okay? Or the worst of the two, in that sense. So what will the detective do? The detective is going to get these two people and interrogate them. How? Okay, Law and Order fans, how do you interrogate two prisoners? Good cop, bad cop is one of the strategies. What's the most important strategy, though? Do you want to interrogate them together?
No, separate.
Okay, you actually, all right, so you actually have to get these two people in different rooms because they shouldn't be communicating with each other. If they don't communicate, they don't cooperate. And you don't want them to cooperate. You want one of them to give up the other one. Okay, yes, so betrayal. Another form of betrayal, Mehmet. So you want one to betray the other in this crime that were committed together, okay? In that sense, you have to prepare a plan, like a deal, for these guys so that they will confess. So cooperating then would be not confessing, because by confessing you actually you have one person betraying the other if they confess. So cooperation is not confessing in that sense. Okay? Cooperation between one prisoner with the other is not confessing. But the detective wants a confession. So the detective doesn't want cooperation between you guys, okay? So he or she is trying to trick you by giving you both a deal separately. He's trying to trick you so that you will confess, all right? That's a story. That's a typical story. In this deal, cooperating, so not confessing, would actually get you in prison, both of you in prison, for only 1 year. Because the detective has some evidence, little evidence, but doesn't really have much to get you both in for a long time. But from the detective's perspective, he wants to get you in for a long time, okay? So preferably for life. That's the thing. So he or she says, if you defect, meaning if you confess, but Orkun is not going to confess, then he's going to prison, and you're getting a deal. You're going out free, and I'm going to send him to prison for life. In other words, you're buying your freedom by getting into this deal. You're betraying him. But he goes to prison for life and you don't. Imagine that the alternative is he actually confesses and you don't. So you don't betray, but he betrays you. As a result, you go to prison for life and he actually goes out free. Okay, that's your option. And it turns out that people who are offered a deal like this one will never trust the person that they've committed the crime together. Okay? So the other alternative, the fourth alternative is you confess, and Orkun also confesses. When you both confess, I, the detective, put you in prison for 20 years. Okay? When you both confess, you actually get in prison for 20 years. Okay? Now, the numbers are not important here. The point is, okay, I can change the 20 years to 25 years or 30 years or 10 years, 15 years, doesn't matter. I can change that 1 year to 6 months, doesn't matter. So the numbers are just hypothetical numbers. What matters is, if you both defect and confess to me, you both get a high number of years in prison. Because you both confess and I have confessions from both of you, I didn't have to make a deal. Okay? Because my deal is, you confess and he doesn't. Okay? And when you both don't confess, you can actually only stay in prison for a short time and then you're free to go. So the ideal for you to stick with each other. The ideal for you not to confess, to cooperate with one another. You'd win more. You'd be in a better shape. But what happens is, in terms of your preferences, you never actually trust Orkun with your life. Because if you do, what you risk is life in prison. Or forget about prison, a huge loss for you. Okay? Same thing with him. He has to trust you with everything. Now, would you be able to trust one another? What do you think? She's looking at Orkun.
I think so.
You would trust Orkun? Orkun?
I don't think so.
Okay, there we go. In this situation, we have Orkun, who got out of prison, got the deal, and you are actually in prison for life. If I gave you more time to think about this, you probably would have said, I don't think I would trust Orkun. Okay, you committed the crime together. Let's assume that before you committed the crime, you made a deal. Would you trust that deal?
I would, but...
You would, but?
If I have the other guy's parents as collateral, then I would trust him with my life. Because if he does something that I don't want, he knows his family's going to be killed. Did you watch this movie? I think it was last week. There's a movie on Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Did you guys watch it? It was on I don't remember the name of the movie. Robin Wright and a guy that I really like. I forgot the names, but it's just check it and you will find the movie really easily. It was I think they showed it a couple months ago. Okay, it's a very interesting movie. Oh no, I can't ruin the movie for you. And to give the movie as an example, I have to ruin the movie for you. I'm not going to do it. In that movie, even something like that doesn't work. Let me just say that. Okay, Kwaj? When you have, let's just say, Orkun's mom is kids or, okay, anyone. So you're saying that there has to be something that guarantees that she's not going to betray me. Well, the fact is,
there's, you know, before you committed the crime, you don't really usually think or plan getting, you know, all, you should.
Because you're a professional, you should.
Oh, yeah, if you're a professional, you should. Let me tell you something interesting. Criminals usually don't. People usually don't do that kind of planning. Even then, how do you know? How can you be sure that she's going to sacrifice herself for her family? You would think she would, right? Can you 100% trust it?
Yes.
Yes, but the thing is that the police also kind of triggers you to do, because he tells you that if you confess, he will get lifetime and you'll get out.
Mm-hmm.
And that would make anyone confess.
That's a good incentive, isn't it? And in the meantime, you know, I'm really forceful. I might actually be threatening her a little bit with my gestures. I might actually make her believe me. I might give interesting details related to you guys, implying that I actually know what you did, and, you know, I can actually try to trick you into it. But forget about all my talent as a detective of tricking you into confessing. The major important point of prisoner's dilemma is you don't trust a person who is trapped in another room, who might be actually saying anything about you to save his or her own butt. Okay? So that really is the point. And another important thing is you cannot communicate. I have to stop all the communication between you. Okay? And I might say, I will foresee what you have just said, and I'll say, I know that Orkun threatened you to hurt your family. We secured your family. Your family is in a secure place now. Sure. I can make her believe that I actually, you know, I saved your family is in the police protection program now. Yeah. So in that sense, in English, in that sense, guys, this whole scenario points us in this direction. You have to trust each other. How much do you trust each other? That's pretty much it. How much do people trust each other? Mehmet doesn't trust anyone.
I say
Yes.
Okay, Tülay seems to be more trusting. No? Okay. So I actually picked you thinking you might be more trusting, actually. And I was actually quite successful in my choices. I don't know. I thought Orkun might be trusting too, but apparently not. So it looks like in this situation, if you trust him, you're screwed. He actually got out. You're in prison for life. Okay? But if you thought more about it, and like Tülay said, if I kept saying, you know, he's about to confess, you confess first, and I'm going to give you the deal, then I can push you in that direction. The important stuff here, communication is not present, okay? And you actually rank the things that you value, okay? Do you want to be in prison for life, or for 20 years, or for 1 year, or for 0 years? These are your preferences. You're ranking your preferences. And of course, a normal person will want 0 years in prison. An average person, that's what I mean. 1 year will be preferred to then 20 years, and then life. Yes?
Actually, it's really good for the Cuban Missile Crisis event that occurred between the US and Soviet. No one did, there was no communication between them, no one knew who was going to do what.
Absolutely. Prisoner's dilemma is used a lot in international relations as a scenario to show that states, when they don't trust each other, when they don't have communication with each other, when they rationally calculate things, there is a rationality assumption here. When you rationally calculate things, then this is always going to end up with a confession from both, and I'm going to send you for prison for 20 years. Okay? 20 years is more than enough for me as a detective. So even if even in a deal where one of you is free, the other one goes to prison for life, I don't like it as a detective. I don't like it as much as 20 years because I think you're both guilty. Okay? So if I let you go, I'm not very much pleased with that. So usually I'll try to get both of you to confess. And with this plan, you both confess. And the problem is, and that's what prisoner's dilemma is all about. Although, if you cooperated with one another, although you could get a much better deal, you fail to cooperate with one another, you defect from one another, and you end up in not the best strategy. Okay? So the payoff is not the best when you defect. But that is pretty much what always takes place. Okay? That's what prisoner's dilemma actually shows us. All right. So, all right. There's something messy with the slides, but I think this is it. All right. So, in terms of decision making, Axelrod says there are different ways to decide on things. And one way is to use a random strategy. And in that random strategy, you can actually, you don't make any plans. No, I'm not looking for money. I'm looking for my phone, actually. No, I'm not going to flip a coin. I'm not going to flip my phone. That's for sure. No. Let's just assume that in a scenario where we trade, I'm actually going to, okay, I'll come here. I'm actually going to use random strategy, and I'll say, İski, right? İkin. I'll say, let's trade our phones, okay?
Okay.
And you're like, okay. We trade the phones, okay? And then next year, I come to İkin back and I say, let's trade our phones.
No.
No? Okay. All right. The next year, I come to you and I say, let's trade our phones. Can we trade our phones? Thank you. I cheated. I got both phones. The first year, we actually traded fine. Next year, we didn't even trade. She didn't want to. The next year, I cheated. I didn't pay her. I actually got both phones, okay? In this example, I'm actually flipping a coin. And my strategy is completely random. I don't really make a planned strategy. That's what random strategy is. What do you feel now?
Cheated.
You feel cheated. Do you feel betrayed? Okay. You feel betrayed. Okay. I'll give you your phone back. Next year. Can we trade?
No.
She doesn't want to trade with me anymore. 5 years passed. Okay? And in those 5 years, you really need this phone from me. Now you want to trade. You have to trade with me. You feel that you have to trade with me. So we trade again. Do you want to trade?
Yes, but I just get first.
This time, you are actually, okay, you are actually cheating. Oh my God, I taught her how to cheat. So I don't have anything. So this is, in her case, this is also random. The next year, we might actually trade, do it at the same time. We trade fine. There's nothing wrong in our trading situation. Okay? Let me get my phone. Another strategy would be always defecting. This is almost like, imagine there's a professor who always gives Fs. No one would take that class again from that professor, right? Always defecting means you never actually cooperate. So in our case, if in the first time I got both phones, I defected. 5 years later, you really need the phone, so you decide to trade with me again. I got it again. Okay, I cheated again. 5 years later, again, you really have to trade with me. I got the phone again. So an always defector, after a while, will not really be able to do the trading with as many partners as he or she can. Or if it's a state, the state will not be a preferred trade partners for any state. So you will be isolated after a while. In always cooperate, you know, I always cooperate, you always cooperate, let's just say, and I always get the phone. You're always cheated. After a while, you're not going to want to trade with me, but at the same time, there will be a reputation in the international system that it can always cooperate. You know, she's so gullible. Very polite, thank you. So she always cooperates. The reputation of always cooperation is going to lead to being always tricked or being always cheated, betrayed. And always defection will lead to a reputation for me, and as a result, I'm going to be a less preferred trading partner. So always defection is not a good idea either. Random strategy, on the other hand, will confuse you. You won't know what I do. You won't know what kind of a trader I am, so you're not going to trust me much with that either. So instead, cooperation will be possible if tit for tat as a strategy is followed. Tit for tat means you give the benefit of the doubt. What does that mean? Giving benefit of the doubt.
Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Okay, so if I will be nice to you at first, and if you cheat, I'm not going to ever, you know, do this with you. Okay, so I'm not going to trade with you. But in my first move, there are moves in this game. In my first move, I cooperate. She cooperated on the first move. And if I cheated, she cheated in the next time. So she decided to do whatever I do after giving me the benefit of the doubt in the first move. Okay, that's what tit for tat means. So cooperation, then, is possible by using tit for tat strategy. And tit for tat strategy is only possible if there are international regimes that will encourage the use of tit for tat strategy. Okay? So you cooperate on the first move, reciprocate, do whatever your opponent does in the other moves. And only international regimes will actually lead to cooperation. Now, I have the game that Axelrod actually shows us, okay, here. So look at the prisoner's dilemma. It's the same thing, the numbers are different, okay? The game is the same game. In the first one, if you both cooperate with one another, you get +5s. If one of you decides to cheat, the cheater gets +10 for once, and the other one gets -20. But if you both defect, that means you don't trade with one another, so you don't gain anything. Okay, you just go find another trading partner. So in the example with Ikin, I was the one who defected, right? So in my first defection, I got +10. I got the phone. Okay? And you got -20 because you don't have the phone anymore. So you are really betrayed. You're really cheated. If we were to cooperate, I no longer needed my phone, and I would want your phone more, and you would want mine more. So we would get a +5. Okay? We would both get a +5 then. This is different. The numbers are on purpose different than the prisoner's dilemma game, because in the prisoner's dilemma game, we're talking about two people, you know, in a situation of interrogation. Here, this is actually a trading scenario. Okay, if two states trade with one another, meaning they cooperate, they'll get more. They'll get +5. $5 million, I don't know. $5 billion. So whatever the number is, I don't care what the number is, okay? But in the defection, once I defect, in the first time that I defect, I'm going to get plus 10, and she's going to get minus 20. If we don't trade with one another, we don't gain anything, but we don't lose anything either. Because you know what will happen? Whoever has my archaic phone, and there will be some other person who's using this old phone here, and that's what she needs. So she'll go to that person as a trading partner. She's not going to do anything with me anymore because I cheated. Okay? And me, I'm going to go find another phone that she does and find another trading partner. And then try to cheat with them. Okay? So again, exactly. If I actually do this a lot, if I have a reputation as an always defector, no one will believe me in the future. And no one is going to actually trade with me anymore. What matters here is we would both benefit from this trade if we did it, if we cooperated with one another. But the fact is, because defection doesn't really mean loss, most states will actually defect. They're not going to trust each other. For that reason, with this logic, the neoliberal institutionalists believe that we need international regimes. In standard prisoner's dilemma, like we said, the dominant strategy is defect. You always defect. That's the dominant strategy that you pick, defection. The equilibrium, meaning the strategy that both players pick, will be defect. They will both defect. And the expectation as a result will be no cooperation between these two actors. Okay? Now the modification. What do international regimes do in a situation like this, in a trading or any other situation like this? How can you make this game a game that the two players will cooperate? If Onur and Ekin could play this game more than once, do you think they would be able to actually cooperate with one another? Let's just say you both went to prison for 20 years, and then you got out and you decided to commit another crime. You're going to rob a bank now. Okay? So you stayed in prison after you both defected. You stayed in prison for 20 years. You got out, you got back together, and you said, let's rob this bank. Yes, they didn't learn their lesson. Maybe they did, though. This time, if you assume that you got caught again, what would you do? Having gone through the 20 years of prison for defecting from one another, what would you do? Cooperate this time?
Yes.
Orkun doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to think that cooperation is a good idea. What do you think? Would you cooperate this time?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure, because I still will tell you that you'll go to prison for life if she doesn't cooperate. If she confesses. Okay? So I'm actually still giving you the option of going to prison for life if she actually sells you out. So in the second time when we play this game, there's still the risk of defection. Let's just assume that you played it again, and this time I sent you to prison for another 20 years. How old are you now?
60. 23.
You're 23. The first time around, you were 43 when you got out. And then you're getting out at 60. Exactly. So the next time, you'll be more likely to cooperate. Okay? But most probably in prisoner's dilemma with the two prisoners, it's still very difficult to actually get this game to cooperate. With states, though, because states are, states have a longer span of possibilities of cooperation, the states actually will learn the game after a while, okay? And they learn that cooperation may pay off better than non-cooperation. That's what the neoliberal institutionalists are arguing, okay? If you play the game multiple times, there will be a learning process. Well, in the case of states, you don't, the states don't die. So another thing is communication. What if you could, you had telepathy kind of skills and you could communicate with one another? What if there was a secret way of communication between the rooms? What else? How else can you? Well, what if you actually made a deal beforehand? What if you're married and for 40 years when you actually committed the crime, and you trust this person with all your life? Even then, I wouldn't be so sure. But what if you could, in some way or another, communicate right after right after the crime, right before the interrogation? Okay? So I would say that the two possible ways of getting cooperation between two actors in prisoner's dilemma is: one, play the game many times. Make sure that the game is played many times so that there will be a reputation, or there will be mutual trust built between the two actors. And then the second one is try to communicate. If the two actors can communicate with one another, it's going to be much easier to trust one another. Okay? So these two conditions, if you modify the prisoner's dilemma with these two conditions, you might actually get cooperation. And according to this, there hasn't been much cooperation in the international system in the past, especially in those, remember we started with 1500s and we talked about Westphalia and all. There wasn't much communication between states. And there wasn't many opportunities to play the game many times. So these two factors actually led to lack of cooperation in the international system for a very long time. But after the Second World War, there were regimes, there were international organizations established, economic and political, environmental, several international organizations established as the current regime after the Second World War, so that states will increase cooperation between them. How? By playing the game multiple times and by increasing communication between the states. Okay? So one important issue that the liberal institutionalists would argue that took place between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War is miscommunication or lack of communication. You mentioned, Tülay mentioned Cuban Missile Crisis, yeah? So instances like Cuban Missile Crisis are hugely affected by lack of communication. We didn't really know much about the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union was quite closed in the sense that it didn't know what was going on much in the Western Bloc. Both sides believed that they were evil. The other side was evil. Okay? So there was this mirror image situation where both sides were quite similar to one another, but they perceived each other as the exact opposite of one another, which actually led to the impossibility of playing the game multiple times or impossibility of communication between the players. Now, guys, some mutual interest, according to the liberal institutionalist perspective, some mutual interest exists between not only states but also people. There's always some mutual interest. I actually, you can have deals like this. Before coming to class, if you get me coffee, I'll give you a lift home. So you can actually get into all sorts of deals, all sorts of cooperative deals with one another, and there will be some kind of mutual interest between people, okay, with anyone. I know that some of you still don't know each other in this classroom. I know. I realize. Even in that situation, you can find yourself in a position where one of you will say, well, I'll give you my lecture notes. In return, can you do this or that for me? So there can be some mutual interest even between actors that don't know each other at all. Okay? So in that sense, from the liberal institutionalist perspective, the game that is being played in the international relations is not a zero-sum game. It is a game where I can win and you can win as well. Remember that prisoner's dilemma thing where you have both fives as opposed to both zeros. Okay? So I can get 5, you can get 5. And next year, I can get 5 and 5. That's better than you getting 10 now and I get minus 20 now. And next time, we have the possibility of playing the game again. So from this perspective, it's possible to cooperate. From a purely realist perspective, Mehmet would argue, you will see the game as a zero-sum game, and you're never going to trust the other side. Okay? So these are very different perspectives, the realist and liberal perspectives. They both believe that the system structure is anarchical, meaning there's lack of central authority. But the realists, moving from that point, realists argue that cooperation is very difficult, and at times it's undesirable. But the liberals would argue that cooperation is possible and desirable. What can we do to make cooperation possible? So from the liberal perspective, international regimes are desirable, and they're supposed to help everyone, every state in the system. From a realist perspective, the international regimes will be helping the powerful states to increase their powers because the game is a zero-sum game. Okay? And the critical perspective would say that international regimes will mostly increase cooperation between powerful states, and it will exploit the less powerful states. So the regimes are being criticized in that sense. Okay, I'll talk more about this on Thursday. It would be helpful if you read Axelrod's first chapter. It's a short chapter. Thank you.